Welcome back to another episode of Masha Schwartz Art. Today we're going to be doing a very special project that's part of my Lady in Red series, but focused on kind of a few elements of protection. I think this whole year has been centered around protection for all of us with COVID, with a lot of other issues. And I thought it would be cool to create a piece on the concept of being bulletproof. So today's piece is around that. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. And this piece is influenced by a classical music type of color palette. So in a few minutes, I'll share what colors I'm using and we can get started. If you guys are new to my channel, remember to subscribe below and remember to support my channel. If you would like to purchase some of the materials for this piece that I've used so you could use them for your pieces, I'll link them in the links below. Thanks guys, and let's get started. All right, so for this piece today, we are going to be using one of my classical color palettes. And in here, you see cerulean blue, you see primary yellow, I have Naples yellow, which looks like this. I do have some gold, and I'm using Payne's gray, as well as primary red and alizarin crimson. I'm also using burnt umber, and I think I mentioned Payne's gray, and just titanium white. All right. I'm also using for today's piece a couple of bullets from some of our guns, which I'm using them for inspiration for the whole concept of being bulletproof. So I would love to hear your ideas on this concept. I actually thought it was very funny that every time you place any sort of vaccine-related outfits or anything on Facebook or on Instagram, you would get like advertisements below saying you cannot use untested drugs, which in my mind, like everybody is asking us to be vaccinated by untested drugs. So I think it's kind of funny. And I posted a little bit about this on my channel. So if you missed it, take a look at the reel that I posted. But if you guys are ready to paint, I'm ready to paint. I have my coffee ready. Hope you have your drinks ready and your art materials. And let's get started. All radios, thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. Oh, I usually cover also the brushes that I use. So for my painting, I use a 1-inch brush, a 1/2-inch brush, and a 1/4-inch brush. I also use a number 1 rounded brush and a half round, like a number 2 rounded brush as well sometimes. So some of these are a little bigger or smaller. This one is number 6. I've used that one in my last video, but I think this one is 2. So this is 2, so we'll be using this as well. Just a few brushes. I don't buy a whole lot of brushes. I think it's unnecessary, but it is helpful sometimes to have a few different ones on hand, just in the event that you need them for like trees or something fancy that you're painting, right? All right, cool. So I usually use pretty simple techniques for painting. You guys know this. I start with the background. I use a larger brush to fill in the majority of my background, and then I typically fill in the details, right? So for this piece, I'm gonna do the background in a really, really light yellow, like a super light yellow, almost like an off-white kind of color, because I kind of want a really bright feel to this piece, even though it resonates with, you know, a bulletproof concept. I do want this to be bright and sunny for me. And if you guys are adding kind of similar feel to your pieces, one of the things I'd recommend is for your backgrounds, you can really like start and add colors to your canvas as you paint and just blend in right on the canvas. If you're new to painting, be careful as you do that so you don't smudge a whole bunch of colors on your canvas and then have to wait for them to dry before you can paint over. But if you are somewhat experienced, this could be a great technique to start adding onto your set of techniques of just not having to pre-mix every color ahead of time. I recommend this to all of my followers to always paint the sides of your canvas. This makes your canvas complete. It makes it look more professional. It makes it more presentable, and it eliminates the need for you if you are just starting out selling your art or starting out painting and you want to put these pieces up on the walls right away. You can do that as long as the sides of your canvas are fully painted. If your sides of the canvas are not fully painted, a lot of times you're going to go and look for a frame. Frames are pretty expensive, so you're running into additional expenses for your piece unnecessarily. Why do I recommend painting the sides right away? Well, if you are painting the sides as you're mixing the colors, you don't have to mix those colors again later and try to match them to what you've already painted. If you are doing it as an afterthought later, then you're sitting there trying to match the exact color and it becomes more of a hassle than you need. Right? So I'm just painting in the bulk of my pieces here. And as you guys know, I don't do spray painting for the background. Some of the artists do, which is cool. I pretty much just like to put those colors boldly, quickly on my canvas. I'm not worried about the full results. I will fill the rest of them in as I go. One thing I'll mention is if you're using a dark background and you're planning to do lighter colors on top, be mindful of coloring those areas because you're gonna need to wait for those darker colors to fully dry before you can actually paint something light on top of it. I mean, lighter colors are more transparent and unless you're using opaque colors like heavy body colors, you are gonna run into problems with lighter colors on top of dark. So if you have some lighter shades that you're planning to paint on your piece, make sure to leave them blank and don't color them in as you're doing your background. And leave them for those lighter colors so you don't have to go fixing things along the way. Otherwise, I'm not too worried about how I paint my background, if I cover something or cross over something, because I know I can always fix that later. And any pencil marks that I make, I want to cover those up so that they're not apparent during the painting process, right? So if you need to cover something more than once, make sure to do that. So again, we're just doing bright yellow and so a lot of times I paint on the horizontal surface rather than on the canvas. And as you do that, you have access to all of the sides. Obviously, when you put your canvas on an easel, you have to turn your canvas to paint the sides of it. And this is pretty cool because it gives you a completely opposite view of what it is you're painting. And sometimes, as an artist, you're still exploring the whole composition, the whole idea of what it is you're painting. So as you turn your canvas, you can see it from a completely different angle and have like a pretty cool view of what it could look like upside down. And if you like that more, depending on what it is you're painting, you may decide to keep that to be your front-facing image. So don't be afraid as you're putting together your different concepts to turn your canvases around, to turn your canvases sideways, to see your pieces from all different angles, because you will see completely different imagery depending on the side or angle that you're looking at your piece. I do games with some of my students, and one of the things I actually recommend them do, we do this game where we start out with a element, and then the next person adds an element, but each person has the right to like turn the piece around, and they have an opportunity to kind of really make it their own by turning it and adding on to it what they see from whatever side they like. And so the piece may start out this way, for example, and then like somebody turns it sideways and adds to it, and it becomes a completely different piece, and the next person actually likes the way that turned out, that continues to build on it from the same side. So if you guys like the idea, remember that this is a fun game to play with like kids. It's a great game to play with adults, and I use it oftentimes with a lot of my students to kind of jive their creativity. If you are trying to improve your creativity and you're just kind of like really stuck, I get a lot of those days where I wake up and I'm blank, right? I don't know what to paint, what to do. I do create daily, and so for me, it's obviously a problem. For those of you that are full-time artists or trying to be full-time artists or creatives, that's also a problem. So what do we do in those situations? Well, one of the things that I like to do is I like to either go outside and really just enjoy the outdoors, so I could breathe some fresh air, so I could be inspired. Some of us are more inspired by nature, others are inspired by music, some of us are inspired by images or people, what people say. So whatever inspiration you can gain out of like natural outlets that you have that truly jive your creativity, use it. And when I say inspiration, like I might listen to a tune and it really inspires me, and I start kind of like dancing to the tune and creating ideas and really going with the motion. When I paint, the same thing happens. I really try to mimic that same feeling that I've had when I listen to the original inspiration, to see kind of like, can I recreate it? Can this feeling drive the color palette further? What I'm creating further? Can it influence it in a very positive way? And a lot of times it can. That's why my process of Surreabstract creativity is so fluid. It's like I engage with my art. I really look at it from different angles. I don't just sit there and meticulously paint every little area. And I think for many of us who are creatives, we need that space for creativity where we can flourish, where we get inspired, where we look at the piece and it speaks to us in a very different way. And it's perfectly fine to have a piece that's kind of like your own and that has its own mind, its own presence, its own feel. And you're only going to get that if you feel a certain way, if you feel like this true inspiration flowing through you. I know some of the musicians that have little figurines that they put in their studio so they have an audience, right? If you are a creative that likes an audience, by all means, like add an audience to your studio. Have somebody that looks after you, somebody that enjoys the creativity with you. Doesn't even have to be a real person. It could be just figurines. It could be all kinds of different creatures. It could be all kinds of things, right? And so these elements can really help you become more proficient in art and creativity. It could help you elevate your art to the next level because now you are doing it with someone and it becomes this like creative collaborative process. So I'm almost done with this, guys. And we are gonna go into painting some of these protective elements and a cool next part of the piece. Now, I did have that line over there in pencil. I could not fully erase it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to add quite a bit of color there to really push it out and see if I can mask it. And if I can't, I'm going to have to do a second coat here to really cover it up. If you guys are using pencils to sketch out your pieces on your canvas, make sure that you use light pencils. In this case, I didn't have a light pencils by me, so I just used a pencil. And as I used that pencil, some of it didn't erase well. So I'm going to have to go back and kind of fix that. But in general, my rule of thumb is to use a light pencil. The other sad part of that is if I use a super light pencil, you guys can't see what's actually painted in here or sketched out in here. And so it becomes more difficult to kind of like display and work. But all challenges of the trade, right? And we're going to work through them here. All right. So next, add more whites. So next, I'd like to add my bullets for inspiration and okay. All right. I am going to use probably let me see here. What am I thinking? Thinking maybe even a lighter color than this. So I really just want a super light color for these lines. I'm going to use this brush here. Might use a darker color. And the same thing here. As your background is drying, be careful as you put your hands on there because they're going to pick up colors. So as you're adding new colors, you don't want to smudge them. Also, be careful as you are painting some of the details, right? You want those details to be well pronounced and you want your hand to be steady as you're doing them, whereas the initial sketch may be from your shoulder and that movement can come from your shoulder. The details should be more stationary. Right. Cool. All right, guys. Now, as I'm doing curves, I am dragging my straight brush around the angle and just around the curve and angling it. This allows me to use the side of the brush here to, like this side of the brush, to really paint at that angle and create a fine line along which the curve goes around, right? And so depending on how you use the color could be darker on the edge and then lighter further out. You could have that nice gradient from dark to light on your canvas. And it could have a really neat look for your piece. Cool. Now here I'm looking to kind of extend the same one. And take that further out to here. I would like to have a little bit of black down here. Again, I don't use black, but I do use Payne's gray. So as I'm doing that, I can use the Payne's gray for my color out here. As you're adding darker shades, guys, be careful. You cannot erase them as easily, right? So as you're adding those in, just be mindful of that and make sure that you're adding them exactly where you'd want them, not just anywhere. If you want a wider space for your brush, use this, and then you could always turn the brush as you go down to lessen the space that it's covering on the canvas. So like this, right? like this, and then sideways. It's a pretty good technique even with a larger brush. If you step out of line here and you need to clean it up, while your paint is still wet on the canvas, just use a little bit of water and come in and clean up the paint. For the dark colors, this works really well, and it allows you to clean up the problems that you may have created. And then all you do is you come in with your paper towel and you kind of gently brush it off. You can also come in with your brush again and just wipe it off, as long as you wipe off your brush in between those swipes. So just like this, right? And I'm making those really distinct lines, and all I'm using is water. That's literally all I'm using right now is water on my brush. There's nothing else on it. And I'm just cleaning up some of these areas that didn't seem quite clean to me. And I'm literally just pushing that paint further out and making it a little bit smoother. I like my paint to be clean, so I like to clean up my paintings if I'm seeing that some problems are, or some lines are not quite as smooth as I like. Okay? All right, same thing here. I'm happy with that. Cool. Next, we're gonna go into some of these circles, and we're gonna see how some of these circles can come alive for us. Yeah, I think we're gonna do the blue ones here. And I'm really actually thinking of doing them much lighter than this. Let me see if I can do them slightly lighter than what we have. I love the cerulean blue, but I kind of want this to be a much lighter color with accents around. And I might even add burgundy on some sides of it. You guys are doing circles. Using a circular brush is super great. And what you can do is use it hand on like this and just press in, and it should create a nice round circle for you. Depending on the size of the circle that you want to press in more or you want to press in less, but it'll give you that opportunity to create a smaller or bigger circle. If you want a bigger circle and your brush is not wide enough, you're going to need to use a wider brush in order to create a much bigger circle. So just like this. When you guys are creating some of these, just be mindful of the canvas. If the canvas is not fully dry, it can still transfer to your hands and then make marks on some of the pieces that you're currently painting. So you guys want to make sure that that's nice and safe. And I typically like to paint from top to bottom if possible, so my hand is not dragging over some of the paint that I'm doing. And it gives me an opportunity to kind of see the piece as well, as opposed to painting the other way around, to where I'm kind of catching some of those lower parts. offhand. All right. So I'm going to quickly go through these. And if you guys are just starting out painting, don't mix a lot of color. Like, don't put out a lot of color on your color palette, and don't mix a whole lot of color for smaller pieces. You're not going to need it. If you need to mix additional color, you can always mix more, but only add a lot of color from your tubes for colors you're going to use for the background, because that's going to take up the largest portion of your piece. The other colors in your piece are usually going to be minimally used, and you typically want to use like less color for it, so don't waste paint. I'm really big on not wasting paints, and I typically tell a lot of my students that, you know, your less is more, so use as you need, and really just like add a little bit and make it last. The other part of it is like, what are you painting? What color are you going to use most of, and where can that help? So if I'm going to be using predominantly yellow, I'm going to have a little bit more yellow and a little bit more white. I usually like to buy a lot of white because I use a lot of white in my colors and as I mix colors. And so I buy like 2 white tubes compared to all the other colors that I may get. Whereas, you know, yellow, or if you guys have a preference for a use of a specific color other than white, definitely get more of that color. But otherwise, buying either 2-ounce or 4-ounce tubes is perfectly sufficient for most colors. I buy like 2 of those in white. So next I want to do the red circles on top carefully as the ones on the bottom are drying. And I'm going to add some clarity to those. Cool. And then I want to also use red for this. Piece right here. I'm going to use a little bit of water. Depending on whether you're using basics or heavy paints, your paints may be a little bit thicker or a little bit more watery. So add water to your paints as you need, but be careful. The more water you add, the thinner the paint becomes and the more transparent it becomes. So kind of keep that in mind as you paint. I use quite a bit of water with my watercolors and much less water for my acrylic paints. Much, much less. Because I don't want my acrylic paint to be as transparent. I like more solid colors. I don't like overlaying. And I think it just has a much, much better look. So next we're going to have nipples painted. And I think some of these could also have a little brownish in them. Not necessarily be all straight. And then this side, same way. Cool. Maybe with a little dark red on different parts. And some on here. Cool. And next we're gonna do something pretty cool. I get to use some of my bullets. And one of the things that I thought was pretty cool on these, one of these says win, and another one says blazer auto. So I'm gonna try to paint some of that into the bullet shells and see what happens. I think it's pretty cool. I'm gonna try to mimic that. I think it's a cool little accent for this piece, and I think it will really help it pop. I'm also going to go through and add a little bit of lines on the bottom of my circles to make them a bit three-dimensional. So if you guys are trying to make yours three-dimensional, just add a little bit of a semicircle on the bottom of them, and that will really make them pop. Just like this. And I'm using just like one of the smaller brushes for it. The other thing you can do is create the top of it in a lighter color. So that will create that light and dark shades for your sphere. Make sure to blend it in and to not just outline it. And here we are. Here we are. On the smaller ones, you don't need a whole lot. You just need a little bit of that outline. On the larger ones, you may need a little more of an accent. So be mindful of that. And I should have started on top here, but I didn't. So now we're fixing, and I'm going carefully on these. Now, all of my paint that I painted is already wet. Cool. So, I'm going to do these as well here, and I'm just doing straight lines. And a line here. Cool. And next we just want to paint in the bullets. So I'm going to be using gold for the bullets, and I'm going to be filling them in first. I might do the sides in brown. And then I'm going to go in with a marker afterwards and paint in some of the words, type in some of the calibers, things like that. Now, when I paint this, I don't mind that everything is not painted in like 100%. Why? Because as you look at the bullet, it's going to reflect. And actually, some parts of it, like on top, are going to reflect more than on the bottom. And you'll have a little bit of a shine on the bottom. So you're going to need to add some of those darker spots anyways. So don't worry about painting in your entire bullet like solid color. You're going to have some differences in those gradations anyways. And what I said was going to happen happened. I got some blue on my hand and then ended up putting it on the canvas. So this happens to you guys. Remember to clean your hand. Even the most professional painters still get mistakes and everything doesn't always go smoothly. But we try. And the concept, guys, is usually the hardest thing. And I spend hours really conceptualizing my art on paper, in my sketchbooks. I sketch daily, all kinds of things. And that's, the execution on the canvas is a lot of times less stressful once you have a really solid idea of what it is you're painting in your mind. And you almost, like, as you are getting inspired, as you are listening to music and gaining that additional inspiration, you can really visualize the colors that you would want for different pieces as you're just looking at them on your sketchbook. And that's the perfect time to kind of try some of these things out, because you can always sketch out small versions of your piece in your sketchbook like 2, 3, 10 times. And you could try out different color combinations to see what you like most if you're just starting out and you're not entirely sure. It's much harder to fix that on a larger canvas once it's already on there. So don't be afraid to use your sketchbook in a versatile way to not only sketch out the pieces that you are thinking of, but also to kind of bring to life some of those colors that you're considering. And it's perfectly fine to do that. I've seen a lot of artists that do, and I'm one of those artists. I used to sketch a lot of my ideas out in color on paper first in my sketchbooks, and they turned out well. Sometimes I even turn them into like original pieces, but many cases they serve as wonderful proofs of concept and really kind of help you define what you need for your bigger piece. All right. So in here, one of the things that you want to do is once you add these bullets, like if you think of the bullets being around here, the reason I didn't paint the interior here in yellow is because you're going to have shades all around if you put the bullets all around this way. So that shade is going to be created both from the bullets and from the nipple, and you would then fill that in with a darker color. So part of the reason I didn't kind of add any background in there was because I realized that as I'm going to paint these in, they're going to create some of those shades. They're also, it could also create shades onto the breast and on other areas, so that's something we might explore as well. But for the time being, this is the way that my piece is going to be. And I'm going to add some of the other parts in marker afterwards. So the same thing here. Guys, let me know in the comments below if you like this, if you want to see more pieces like this. This is just like a simple piece that we're painting today, but the concept actually came to me earlier this year as I was thinking about COVID and about all the challenges that we're experiencing with vaccination and being protected. And, you know, it's just been so hard for some people. And like, honestly, we thought about serious protection with Gary, and we thought about securing our house because of the arrests and the different things that were happening last year with burglaries and people breaking into houses. And so this piece kind of came out as a result of that. And I thought it was just like a fun, neat little concept about women protecting their bodies and being bulletproof. And a lot of times women are the ones who are targeted. So I felt that it was so necessary for us to hear and to see and to remember that women are oftentimes less protected than men. I'm not saying all women, but in many cases, women are more vulnerable. And so that this was the whole premise for this piece. And looks like some of these have a dot in the center and others do not. I'll leave that one in this. So cool. I'm not entirely thrilled with this, so I might do something else on top here. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this piece, guys. And I'm gonna add some details to like the other sides of it, like here in the middle, and so they become a little bit more apparent. But this is kind of what the piece looks like up close. Let me show this audience here so you guys can see. I'm going to work on this top part here and see what else we can do. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this. And I will post the final piece shortly. So join me in a bit to see the final piece. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have an amazing day, guys. I will see you next Friday for our next live session. Take care.